Rain tapped against the window, a steady rhythm in the quiet town. Inside the small house, a boy huddled in the corner, eyes wide, fingers clutching a worn toy fire truck. Noah had seen too much too young. Locked doors, angry shouts, nights spent crying alone while shadows moved through the house. His world was small, cold, and unforgiving, until the day Shadow appeared. Not just any dog. A German shepherd with eyes that seemed to understand everything, even the pain that no one would ask about. Shadow didn't judge. Shadow didn't leave. And in that first tentative moment of trust, something shifted. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, a quiet bond began, a bond that would teach Noah about safety, love, and courage. And as the story unfolds, you'll see how the loyalty of one dog, combined with the courage of a child, can uncover truths no one else would dare speak. Every glance, every nudge, every whispered comfort carries weight here. And if you've ever believed that miracles come in grand gestures, think again. Sometimes they come on four legs, with a wet nose and steady paws. The storm had been building since dusk, a restless wind pushing black clouds over the mountains of Vermont until the sky split with veins of white lightning. Rain came down in sheets, slashing across the windshield of Ethan Ward's patrol truck as he crawled along the back roads of Raven Hollow. Wipers squealed against the glass, fighting a battle they were destined to lose. Out here, in the hollow, storms had a way of swallowing sound. Even the usual hum of crickets or the distant bark of a farm dog was gone. Only the relentless drumming of rain and the low growl of the engine reminded Ethan he wasn't already buried in silence. Beside him, Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, a German shepherd whose black and tan coat gleamed in the intermittent flashes of lightning. The dog's amber eyes scanned the darkness as if they belonged to a creature born of the storm itself. Every muscle was coiled, every breath measured. Ethan had learned years ago that when the world turned hostile and uncertain, Shadow became sharper, more alert, his instincts picking up signals no human ear could register. Ethan glanced sideways. "You feel it too, don't you?" he muttered. His voice sounded strange inside the cab, muffled by the storm outside. Shadow's ears twitched, but he didn't move, gaze fixed out the window toward the blackened trees that bent under the weight of the rain. Ethan had been a sheriff's deputy in these parts long enough to know Raven Hollow wasn't just another New England backroad. It was a place with a memory of accidents no one could explain, houses that rotted long before their time, families who packed up in the middle of the night and never returned. He'd seen it in their eyes when they filed police reports. That quiet fear, the way they'd lower their voices like children afraid of waking something sleeping nearby. The storm made the hollow worse. Every bend in the road, every shadowed tree line, seemed like it was hiding something. Ethan felt it pressing in on him, a heavy weight in his chest. Shadow shifted suddenly, muscles tightening as he pressed his nose to the glass. Then he gave a sharp, low bark, a warning, not the careless noise of a restless dog. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What is it?" Shadow barked again, this time leaning forward, nose flaring. His ears pointed straight ahead, toward a break in the trees, where an old logging track veered off the main road. Ethan slowed the truck, the tires hissing on wet gravel. His headlights caught the entrance, half swallowed by underbrush, where a rusted mailbox leaned sideways, its numbers long washed away. He knew this road. Knew what lay at the end of it, an abandoned farmhouse, left to rot after the last owners disappeared a decade ago. Teenagers still dared each other to visit, telling stories about screams heard from the upstairs windows, about lights flickering when no one lived inside. He'd dismissed it as folklore, the kind every small town carried. But tonight, in the violence of the storm, with Shadow's growl filling the cab. Ethan felt something heavier, something that made his pulse quicken. "All right," he said softly, pulling the truck onto the track. "Let's check it out." The logging road twisted like a snake, mud sucking at the tires, branches clawing at the roof. The headlights caught glimpses of rotted fence posts, splintered and leaning, and the skeletal outlines of apple trees gone wild. The farmhouse emerged out of the storm like a ghost, its roof sagging, windows boarded. The white paint peeled away to reveal grey wood beneath. Rain streaked down the walls, filling the air with the sour smell of mold and wet earth. Ethan cut the engine. Silence roared in. The storm seemed louder now without the hum of the motor. And in that surge of sound, Ethan felt his own breath echoing inside his chest. Shadow was already out of the truck, paws sinking into mud, body angled low as if preparing for a fight. He sniffed the air, growled once, then padded toward the sagging porch. Ethan followed, hand on the flashlight strapped to his belt, the other hovering near his holster. He told himself it was probably nothing. A raccoon trapped under the porch, maybe a fox sheltering from the storm. But Shadow's demeanor told him otherwise. The dog moved with intent, ears rigid, tail stiff, each step silent but certain. The porch creaked under Ethan's weight. The boards were swollen with water, nails rusted and slick. He shone the flashlight across the front of the house, broken shutters, door half off its hinges, rain dripping steadily from the roof. For a moment, he thought he saw movement behind the glass. Just a flicker, a suggestion. But when he aimed the light directly, it was only his reflection staring back, ghost-like and distorted. Then Shadow stopped, nose pressed to a gap between the porch steps and the wet earth below. He gave a sharp whine, pawing at the boards. Ethan crouched beside him, directing the beam downward. The light sliced through the curtain of rain and caught something. Small, pale, shivering. A boy. He was crouched beneath the porch, half hidden by the shadows. Rainwater trickled down his hair, soaking the oversized jacket clinging to his shoulders. His knees were drawn to his chest, one hand clutching a ragged backpack that looked ready to fall apart at the seams. His eyes, wide, frightened, glinting under the flashlight's beam, locked onto Ethan's. For a moment, neither moved. The storm thundered around them, filling the silence with its fury. Ethan felt a cold shock course through him. "Hey," he said gently, lowering the flashlight so it wouldn't blind the boy. "It's okay. You're safe." The boy didn't answer. He only tightened his grip on the backpack, trembling so hard his teeth chattered. Shadow lowered himself, belly flat against the wet wood, tail giving a slow wag. He whined softly, a sound Ethan had heard him use only with frightened children. The boy's gaze flickered to the dog, his lips parting in a whisper that was nearly drowned by the rain. "Don't. Send me back." The words were so faint, Ethan almost thought he'd imagined them. But the plea in the boy's eyes was unmistakable. Raw, desperate, threaded with a terror no child should know. Ethan swallowed hard. Whoever this boy was, whatever had driven him into the storm and under the porch of a rotting farmhouse, one thing was certain: something was terribly wrong in Raven Hollow. And the storm, Ethan realized, was only just beginning. The boy's words clung to the storm like a ghost, fragile, desperate, almost drowned by the pounding rain. "Don't send me back." Ethan Ward froze, crouched low in the mud beside the sagging porch. The beam of his flashlight trembled slightly in his hand, casting shaky light across the boy's small frame. He looked no older than 8, maybe 9. His clothes clung to him in sodden folds, and the backpack he gripped seemed heavier than he was, straps digging into his thin shoulders. Ethan's chest tightened. In all his years on patrol, he had seen drunks, fugitives, even runaway teens hiding in barns or abandoned trailers. But never a child like this, drenched to the bone, eyes wide with something more than fear. Trauma had carved itself into the boy's posture. He wasn't just lost, he was hiding from something. He lowered his voice, trying to cut through the storm with calm steadiness. "Hey, son. My name's Ethan. I'm with the sheriff's office. You don't need to be afraid." The boy shrank back further into the shadows, hugging the backpack tighter, as though the weight inside it was the only anchor keeping him tethered to this world. His lips trembled, forming words but never speaking them aloud. Shadow crept closer. The shepherd's body was low, his ears angled forward, tail moving in slow, deliberate sweeps. He made a sound deep in his throat, not a growl, but a whine of empathy. Ethan had seen it before, in nursing homes, in the homes of victims. Shadow knew when someone was broken. He could read it, feel it. The boy's eyes flicked to the dog. For the first time, his gaze softened, just a fraction. He didn't reach out, didn't speak again, but the tension in his shoulders loosened, the tiniest crack in the wall he had built. Ethan seized the moment. He set the flashlight down in the mud, tilting it upward so the beam glowed softly without blinding the boy. Then he raised his empty hands. "See? Nothing to hurt you. You're safe now." His voice was low, carrying more weight than the storm itself. "No one's going to send you anywhere you don't want to go." The boy's breathing hitched, his lips parted, and finally, a voice emerged, so fragile it was nearly carried away by the rain. "Promise?" The word cut Ethan deeper than he expected. How many times had this child been promised safety before, only to be betrayed? How many adults had looked him in the eye and still abandoned him? "I promise," Ethan said firmly. He wasn't sure how much weight a promise carried anymore, but he knew one thing. He would not let this boy disappear into the hollow again. The boy hesitated, then shifted, crawling out from the crawl space with stiff, hesitant movements. Mud clung to his jeans, water dripping from his hair into his eyes. When he reached the porch's edge, he paused, staring at Ethan, as though expecting the ground to fall away beneath him. Shadow bridged the gap first. The shepherd moved forward, lowering his head until his wet nose brushed against the boy's scraped knuckles. The boy flinched, then froze. Slowly, almost reverently, his small hand moved from the backpack strap to rest against Shadow's head. The dog leaned into the touch, warm and steady. It was the first true contact the boy had made with anyone. Ethan's throat tightened. He swallowed the lump rising there, reaching out slowly. "Come on, kiddo. Let's get you out of this rain." The boy allowed Ethan to help him onto the porch. Up close, Ethan could see how gaunt he was, cheekbones sharp, lips pale. His hands shook violently from the cold, but still he refused to let go of the backpack. Whatever secrets it held, it mattered more to him than his own warmth. Ethan shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. The fabric swallowed him, but he clutched it tight, eyes darting to Ethan's face with suspicion, as if waiting for the jacket to be snatched away again. "What's your name?" Ethan asked gently. The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Noah." The name carried a weight Ethan couldn't quite place. He nodded slowly. "All right, Noah. You're safe now. You hear me?" Noah's gaze flicked to Shadow again, and he gave the faintest nod. His trust wasn't in Ethan, not yet, but in the dog sitting faithfully beside him, watching with quiet intensity. Lightning split the sky above, illuminating the hollow in stark white. For an instant, the farmhouse loomed like a skeleton, its windows, empty sockets, staring out at them. Ethan felt the weight of the place pressing in, a reminder that nothing good ever lingered here. They needed to leave. He placed a steady hand on Noah's shoulder. "Let's get to my truck. Warm, dry, and I'll make sure you don't have to go back to wherever you ran from." At those words, Noah stiffened. His small fingers dug into the jacket, as though anchoring himself to it. His lips trembled again, whispering, "Don't send me back." The plea was more desperate this time, edged with panic. Ethan crouched so he was eye level. Rain dripped down his own face, soaking through his shirt, but he didn't move. He met Noah's gaze and held it steady. "I'm not sending you anywhere. Not tonight. Not ever, if I can help it." Something shifted in the boy's eyes then. A flicker of belief, small but undeniable. He clutched the jacket closer, nodded once, and leaned slightly against Shadow, who pressed closer in response. Ethan rose, guiding him toward the truck. Each step seemed to take effort, as if Noah expected the world to collapse beneath his feet. But Shadow walked at his side, a silent sentinel, and slowly, Noah's movements grew less rigid. By the time they reached the patrol truck, he wasn't looking at the hollow behind them anymore. Ethan opened the door, helping Noah inside. The warmth of the cab washed over them, faint but comforting. Noah sank into the seat, still clutching his backpack, his small frame swallowed by Ethan's jacket. Shadow climbed in after him, curling against the boy protectively. For the first time since Ethan had spotted him, Noah let out a breath that sounded less like fear and more like fragile relief. His eyelids fluttered, exhaustion pulling him toward sleep. But his hand never left Shadow's fur. Ethan closed the door softly and circled to the driver's side. As he slid into the seat, he looked at the boy curled against the dog, and a thought struck him with chilling certainty. This wasn't just a lost child. This was the beginning of something larger, something buried deep in Raven Hollow's shadows. And whatever it was, it had already marked Noah. The drive back through Raven Hollow was slow, the storm pressing down on the truck like a living weight. Headlights cut narrow tunnels through the rain, revealing glimpses of trees bowing under the wind, fence posts half swallowed by weeds, the skeletal outlines of barns long abandoned. Inside the cab, warmth from the vents battled the damp air, but the boy sat shrunken into Ethan's jacket, silent, eyes fixed on the floorboard. Only Shadow moved. The shepherd pressed close to Noah's side, head resting against the boy's knee. Every so often, Noah's small fingers, pale, trembling, slid across the dog's fur, tentative strokes that betrayed how desperately he needed something solid to hold on to. Ethan watched this in the corner of his eye, saying nothing. Trust had to be built brick by brick, not forced with questions. After 20 minutes, the truck rolled up the gravel drive to Ethan's cabin. The headlights swept across the modest structure. Cedar siding darkened by rain, a front porch sagging under the weight of water, and smoke curling faintly from the chimney. It was no mansion, just a two-bedroom cabin tucked into the woods, but it carried warmth Ethan had carved into it after years of service, years of loss. He shut off the engine. The storm seemed louder in the sudden stillness, rain drumming on the roof, thunder echoing in the hills. "We're here," Ethan said softly. He opened the door, stepped into the downpour, and circled around to Noah's side. The boy hesitated, clutching his backpack like a shield. His lips parted as if to speak, but only a faint whisper came. "You'll send me back." Ethan crouched to meet his eyes. The boy's face was pale, shadows pooled under his eyes, his hair plastered to his forehead. "No, Noah," Ethan said firmly. "You're safe with me. No one's sending you anywhere tonight. Not while I'm here." Shadow jumped down first, shaking water from his coat, then waited by the door. He looked back at Noah, eyes sharp but gentle, as though urging him to follow. Slowly, hesitantly, Noah slid out of the truck. His shoes splashed into puddles, and he clutched the jacket tighter around himself, as though it might vanish. Ethan guided him up the porch and into the cabin. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and faint wood smoke. The warmth was modest, not overwhelming, but after the storm it felt like stepping into another world. A lamp glowed softly in the corner, casting golden light across the wooden walls. The furniture was simple: a worn leather armchair, a small couch draped with a wool blanket, shelves lined with books and old photographs. Noah paused just inside the doorway, dripping onto the rug. His eyes darted around the room, wide and uncertain, as though memorizing every exit. Ethan noticed the way his small body leaned instinctively toward Shadow, who trotted to his side and pressed against his leg. The boy let out a shaky breath, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. "You can sit," Ethan offered, gesturing toward the couch. "I'll get you a towel." Noah obeyed, lowering himself onto the edge of the couch, backpack still clutched in both hands. The springs creaked beneath his weight. Shadow immediately leapt up beside him, curling into the blanket, his head resting protectively across Noah's lap. The boy froze. Then, almost unconsciously, his hand slipped into the thick fur at Shadow's neck. The dog's steady warmth anchored him, grounding him in a way no words could. Ethan returned with a towel and a steaming mug of cocoa. "Here," he said, placing them on the coffee table. Noah's eyes flicked to the mug, suspicion lingering, but the scent of chocolate tugged at him. His fingers loosened on the backpack just long enough to wrap around the warm ceramic. He sipped cautiously, the first hint of color returning to his cheeks. Ethan sat across from him, careful not to crowd the fragile space. "This place isn't much," he said, voice steady, "but it's safe. You can rest here tonight." For a moment, silence filled the room. The storm battered against the windows, but inside the only sound was the quiet crackle of logs in the wood stove and the dog's steady breathing. Then Noah spoke, so softly, Ethan had to lean forward to catch the words. "They always say that," the boy whispered. "Safe, but then they send me back." His grip tightened on the backpack again, as though bracing himself for betrayal. The words hit Ethan like a knife. He thought of the system, of courts, paperwork, guardianship orders that rarely asked what the child wanted. He thought of the boy's trembling voice beneath the porch. "Don't send me back. You're not going back tonight," Ethan said firmly. "Not while you're under my roof. You have my word." Noah studied him for a long moment, eyes glistening in the lamplight. Then he looked down at Shadow, who hadn't moved from his lap, and whispered, "He believes you." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wanted to tell the boy that Shadow wasn't the only one, that he would fight tooth and nail to keep him safe. But promises had to be proven, not spoken. So instead he rose, grabbed another blanket from the armchair, and draped it gently across Noah's shoulders. The boy didn't flinch this time. His small body sagged with exhaustion, warmth creeping in, fear loosening its grip just enough to let him breathe. Shadow shifted closer, curling himself tighter around the boy's side like a living barrier against the world outside. Ethan stood in the doorway a long moment, watching the scene. The storm raging beyond the cabin walls, and inside, a child clinging to safety with trembling hands, a shepherd standing guard, and a faint, fragile sense that perhaps, for the first time in too long, Noah wasn't entirely alone. The storm still clawed at the cabin walls, but inside, the world had softened into a cocoon of firelight and shadows. Noah had drifted into a fragile half-sleep on the couch, shadow pressed firmly against his side. The boy's thin fingers were still buried in the dog's fur, even in slumber, as if afraid that letting go might tear him back into the storm. Ethan moved quietly, careful not to wake him. His eyes fell to the backpack still clutched awkwardly against Noah's chest. Even in sleep, the boy's arm tightened around it, as though the frayed canvas contained something more valuable than life itself. Ethan hesitated. He had no intention of prying into a child's belongings, but instinct told him this was more than schoolbooks and toys. Something in the way Noah guarded it, like a soldier with his last weapon, gnawed at Ethan. Finally, when Noah's breathing steadied into the rhythm of exhausted sleep, the boy's grip loosened just enough for the bag to slide onto the couch cushion. Shadow's ears flicked as Ethan leaned closer, but the shepherd didn't move to stop him. Instead, his golden eyes followed, steady, almost approving. Ethan unzipped the backpack slowly, the sound barely audible under the rain outside. Inside, beneath damp clothes and scraps of paper, lay 3 objects that froze him in place. The first was a small leather journal, its cover cracked, corners frayed as though it had been handled countless times. The initials EM were pressed faintly into the leather. Ethan's breath caught. He knew those initials. Eleanor Morgan. The second was a folded stack of documents, their edges warped by moisture but still legible. Insurance papers, signed by Michael and Eleanor Morgan, Noah's parents. The ink bled in places, but the names were clear. His chest tightened. This wasn't just some lost child. This was blood tied to a family name Raven Hollow had buried years ago. And then, at the very bottom, wrapped in a thin scrap of cloth, was a small handheld recorder, old, scuffed, but intact. Ethan turned it over in his palm, the button worn smooth by use. Against his better judgment, he pressed play. At first, static. Then, through the crackle, a voice rose. A woman's voice, soft and melodic. A lullaby. It was delicate, almost fragile, but it carried a warmth that filled the small cabin. Ethan froze where he stood. The melody hung in the air like smoke, weaving through the cedar walls, wrapping around the child on the couch. Noah stirred. His eyes fluttered open, confusion flashing before recognition set in. He bolted upright, nearly dropping the recorder from Ethan's hand. That's her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "That's my mom." Ethan's heart clenched. The boy's eyes glistened, wide and wet, his trembling hands reaching for the recorder as though it were the last living piece of her. Shadow pressed against him, sensing the storm raging inside. Noah clutched the recorder to his chest, tears cutting paths through the grime on his face. "She used to sing that to me every night, before it all." His voice cracked, unable to finish. Ethan crouched beside him, careful not to crowd, but close enough for his presence to feel solid. "It's okay, Noah. She's here in this. You still have her voice." The boy shook his head violently. "They said she was gone. They said both of them were gone. But she... His breath came fast, shallow, each word jagged. They lied. Didn't they? They lied to me. Ethan wanted to answer, but the truth was too tangled, too heavy for one night. All he could do was steady his voice. I don't know everything yet, but I believe you, Noah. And I believe this. Your mom wanted you to have this. To remember her. The boy clung to the recorder, rocking slightly, as if the lullaby itself was the only thread keeping him from unraveling. Shadow climbed onto the couch fully, resting his head across Noah's lap, anchoring him. The boy buried his free hand into the thick fur and let out a choked sob. Ethan's eyes drifted back to the journal, lying open on the table. The handwriting was neat, slanted, unmistakably feminine. He read the first line. If anything happens, it will not be an accident. His stomach turned. The storm outside cracked with thunder, but inside the cabin, another storm was brewing. One bound in ink and lullabies, in secrets carried by a boy who should never have borne them. Ethan closed the journal gently, his mind racing. The insurance papers, the recorder. Eleanor Morgan's voice lingering in the room. None of this was chance. Noah hadn't simply run away. He had carried the evidence of something much darker. Noah sniffled, wiping at his eyes with the sleeve of Ethan's jacket. His voice was small, broken. She sang that song the night before the fire, I remember. She held me and said, "Don't be afraid. No matter what happens, remember the song." He looked up, meeting Ethan's gaze. And then she was gone. The boy's grief was raw, unfiltered, stabbing at Ethan in ways he hadn't expected. He thought of his own past, losses he rarely spoke of, wounds that never healed. He knew what it meant to carry a voice in your head when the body was gone. Ethan placed a hand lightly on Noah's shoulder. You're not alone anymore. We'll find out the truth. Together. The boy stared at him, searching for cracks in the words, for the lies he had grown used to hearing. But Shadow's steady presence seemed to tip the balance. Noah sagged forward, resting his forehead against the shepherd's fur, clutching both the recorder and the dog as if they were lifelines. The lullaby still lingered faintly in the air, looping back into static before falling silent. But its echo stayed, etched into the room, into Noah's trembling breath. Ethan sat back slowly, his mind heavy. The storm outside might pass by morning, but the storm inside Raven Hollow had only just begun to show its teeth. And now, with Elena Morgan's voice alive in his cabin, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no ordinary case of neglect. This was a conspiracy that had been buried in rain, in silence, in lies. And somehow, a boy with a ragged backpack had carried the key all the way to his door. The storm outside had finally begun to ease, trading its violent downpour for a steady drizzle. But inside Ethan's cabin, the air held its own storm. Quieter, more fragile, contained within the boy who sat at the small wooden table, his shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the plate in front of him. Steam curled up from the bowl of chicken stew Ethan had placed before him. It wasn't much. Simple vegetables, tender meat, the kind of food a man cooked when he lived alone. But its warmth filled the room, softening the cedar air. Shadow sat close by, head resting on his paws, his eyes never leaving Noah. At first the boy didn't move. He held the spoon like it was foreign, suspicious. Then, cautiously, he took a sip. The warmth seemed to strike through his thin frame all at once. His eyes closed, a small, involuntary sigh escaping his lips. For a few moments, there was only the quiet sound of spoon against bowl, the slow act of a starving child, rediscovering what it meant to be fed without fear. Ethan sat across from him, his own plate untouched, watching carefully. He wasn't looking for gratitude. He was looking for the shadows in the boy's expression, the silences between each bite. Noah finally spoke, voice low, as if pulled out against his will. He never cooked, just bottles. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't ask who. He already knew. Noah stirred the stew, gaze fixed on the swirling broth. Sometimes he'd forget I was there. Lock the door. I'd bang and nobody came. His voice cracked, but he kept speaking as though the food gave him strength. Other times he'd remember. That was worse. Shadow lifted his head, ears pricking. The boy's small hand slipped instinctively to the shepherd's fur, fingers digging in for reassurance. What happened when he remembered? Ethan asked gently, careful not to let anger bleed into his tone. Noah's lips trembled. He kept his eyes on the stew. He said I was a burden. Said if it weren't for me, none of it would have happened. The accident, the fire. He said I ruined everything. The words struck like a knife. Ethan forced himself to stay still, but his hands curled into fists under the table. He wanted to drag Victor Hale into the storm right now, make him choke on every poisoned word he'd ever spat at this child. But he held his silence, because Noah needed space to release what he'd buried. The boy continued, voice dropping to a whisper. He'd drink, and sometimes he'd stand in the doorway and just watch me. For hours, like he was waiting for me to disappear. His eyes flicked up at Ethan, fear flickering there, as though he expected disbelief. But Ethan's gaze was steady. I believe you, he said simply. Something broke in Noah then. Something small but important. His shoulders shook, and his spoon clattered back into the bowl. Tears welled, spilling over before he could stop them. Shadow pressed against him, climbing up onto the bench with surprising grace, curling his body alongside Noah's. The boy buried his face into the shepherd's fur, sobs, muffled but raw. Ethan sat frozen for a moment, watching. Every fiber of him ached to reach out, to promise the boy that Victor would never touch him again. But he knew words like that could feel empty. Instead, he let the storm of grief pass naturally, let the boy empty what he had held too long. When Noah finally lifted his head, his eyes were red, his face damp. He wiped his nose on his sleeve, ashamed, muttering, "Sorry." "Don't ever apologize for telling the truth," Ethan said quietly. Noah looked at him for a long moment, as though measuring the weight of those words. Then he nodded slightly and reached for the stew again. He ate slower now, steadier, as though each spoonful was no longer just food, but a kind of grounding. Ethan leaned back, his mind seething. Every detail painted a clearer picture. The drinking, the locked doors, the cruel words. This wasn't mere neglect. It was calculated cruelty, the kind designed to break a child until he believed he was nothing. And yet, despite it, Noah had clung to life, to his mother's lullaby, to the scraps of evidence in that backpack. That resilience hardened Ethan's resolve. He would not let Victor Hale win. When the boy's bowl was finally empty, Ethan rose, cleared the dishes, and poured him a glass of water. "You did good, Noah," he said softly. "You told me the truth. That matters." The boy hesitated, then whispered, "You won't tell him I said it, right?" He always said no one would believe me, that if I talked, they'd send me away. Ethan crouched down, eye level, his voice steady as stone. Noah, listen to me. I believe you. And I won't let anyone hurt you for speaking the truth, not while you're here. Shadow gave a low rumble, as if to echo the vow. For the first time, Noah allowed the smallest flicker of relief to soften his features. It wasn't a smile, not yet, but it was something close, a crack in the wall of fear. He leaned against Shadow again, eyelids heavy, exhaustion tugging at him. Ethan rose quietly, watching the boy curl into the dog's warmth, and felt the storm shift inside him. It wasn't rage alone anymore. It was resolved, sharp and unyielding. Victor Hale had stolen enough. Whatever it took, Ethan would bring the truth to light, and this time, no child would be silenced. The cabin had gone quiet after Noah drifted into sleep, curled tightly against Shadow on the couch. The dog's steady breathing filled the silence, a living shield around the boy, but Ethan's own mind refused to rest. He sat by the window, the dim lamp casting his reflection in the glass, staring out at the rain-slicked woods. His thoughts, however, were somewhere else entirely. Back in time. Back to the Morgans. Michael and Eleanor Morgan. Their names still lived in old case files buried in the county archives, though most in Raven Hollow spoke of them as if they had been erased. The official reports had been simple, almost too simple. A car accident on Route 7, followed by a fire that consumed their home weeks later. Case closed. Nothing suspicious. Nothing worth dragging through the courts. But Ethan remembered the day the crash report crossed his desk. He wasn't a lead investigator back then, just a deputy, but he had read every line. Something in it had never sat right. The details were sparse, like someone had trimmed the fat until nothing remained but bare bone. The skid marks were noted, but never explained. The angle of impact was brushed off as unfortunate road conditions. No mention of another vehicle, even though several witnesses had whispered about seeing headlights that didn't belong. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, the memory gnawing harder now that Noah's story had cracked the surface. Neglect, abuse. Yes, those were crimes. But this was beginning to smell like something deeper, something rotted from the inside out. And then there was Elena. Ethan remembered her faintly, bright-eyed, quiet, the kind of woman who had a presence without needing to raise her voice. She had come into the station once, years before, filing a complaint about harassment from her brother-in-law, Victor Hale. Ethan had watched her sign the statement with a steady hand, though her voice had trembled. He had believed her, but when the case was passed up the line, it disappeared into silence. Too little evidence, they said. Just family tension. Nothing actionable. Weeks later, she was gone. Now her journal sat on his table. Her voice was on that recorder, and her son was asleep 10 feet away, carrying scars Victor had carved into him. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't a coincidence. The crash, the fire, the papers, the threats Noah described, it was all connected. Someone had wanted the Morgans erased, and Victor had benefited most. Guardianship meant control. Insurance papers meant money. And a vulnerable child meant silence. But Raven Hollow wasn't a town that liked questions. Ethan knew that better than anyone. For years, he'd felt the undercurrent. The way conversations hushed when certain names were mentioned. The way doors closed when too many questions were asked. The Morgans' deaths had become another shadow in that long tradition of silence. People said accidents, tragedies, misfortune, but no one said murder. Lightning flickered outside, illuminating the trees in brief silver light. Ethan caught his own reflection in the window, his eyes hard, jaw set. He had sworn long ago that he wouldn't let the hollow eat at him the way it had others, and wouldn't let its secrets swallow him whole. But tonight, with a child asleep under his roof and evidence spread across his table, he knew he didn't have a choice anymore. This wasn't just about protecting Noah. This was about exposing what had been buried. He rose and crossed to the table, pulling Elena's journal toward him. He flipped to the page he'd read earlier. If anything happens, it will not be an accident. Her words stared back at him, carved in ink, a voice from the grave. He turned another page, scanning quickly. Mentions of Michael being followed, notes about Victor's drinking, his temper, threats muttered late at night. The fear bled through every line, but so did defiance. Ethan closed the book with a quiet thud. His pulse hammered, but his mind was clear. Noah's story had transformed suspicion into certainty. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't even just abuse. It was a chain of events woven together with precision, a conspiracy that reached back years. Shadow stirred, lifting his head to watch Ethan. The dog's eyes gleamed in the lamplight, as though he too felt the shift in the air. Ethan gave a faint nod, almost speaking to himself. We're going to find the truth, no matter who's standing in the way. Behind him, Noah whimpered in his sleep, murmuring words Ethan couldn't make out. The boy clutched the recorder even in dreams, as though Elena's lullaby could still guard him. Ethan's chest tightened. He would not let this child grow up haunted by shadows and lies. But he also knew what was coming. If he pulled at this thread, the town would notice. Raven Hollow's silence wasn't born of ignorance. It was born of survival. Someone had tied knots around this case long ago, and loosening them would make enemies. Ethan stared once more at the rain beyond the glass. The hollow looked calm now, bathed in silver drizzle. But he knew better. The darkness here wasn't swept away by storms. It lingered, waiting. And somewhere out there, Victor Hale was still walking free. The thought sent a chill crawling down Ethan's spine. He wasn't just a threat to Noah. He was the loose stone in the wall, the one that tied all of this together. Ethan could already see the shape of the fight ahead, and it would not be easy. He turned off the lamp and stood in the dark, letting the quiet seep in. Behind him, Shadow had resumed his post beside the boy, protective, unwavering. Ethan knew then, the storm wasn't over. It had only shifted form. And Raven Hollow was about to show its teeth again. Morning came slowly, grey light pushing through the rain-streaked windows of Ethan's cabin. The storm had passed, leaving the air damp and heavy, the woods outside washed in silence. Inside, the smell of coffee mingled with cedar smoke, grounding the room in a faint sense of normalcy. Noah sat at the small table, shoulders hunched, as he picked at a piece of toast. His eyes were hollow from restless sleep, but he stayed close to Shadow, whose head rested on the boy's knee. Every so often, Noah's hand dropped to the shepherd's fur, as if confirming that the dog was still there, still real. Ethan watched from the kitchen counter, sipping coffee. He hadn't slept much either. The journal, the recorder, Noah's story. They had kept him awake long into the night, but the boy's presence grounded him in a way he hadn't expected. Protecting him wasn't just duty now. It was personal. The quiet was broken by a sound Ethan hadn't heard in years but knew instantly, a heavy fist pounding against his front door. 3 strikes, loud, authoritative. Noah froze, the color drained from his face. His spoon clattered against the plate as his whole body recoiled, breath catching in his throat. Shadow snapped upright, ears forward, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. The knock came again, louder this time. Ethan set down his coffee. His jaw tightened. "Stay here," he told Noah softly, but the boy was already sliding off the chair, eyes wide, body trembling. He ducked under the table, as if it were the only safe place left in the world, clutching his backpack tight to his chest. The knock turned into a shove. The door rattled in its frame. Then came a voice, rough and slurred, soaked in alcohol and arrogance. "Ward, open up! That boy doesn't belong to you." Victor Hale. Ethan felt the tension coil in his muscles. He moved to the door, hand brushing the holster at his hip but not drawing. Shadow padded ahead of him, hackles raised, lips peeled back over his teeth. The shepherd planted himself firmly in front of the door, growling, rising to a warning snarl. "Ward, I know he's in there." Victor's voice was louder now, fury mixed with liquor. "You think you can just keep him from me? He's mine by blood, and you've got no right." Ethan unlocked the deadbolt but kept the chain fastened, opening the door just enough to face the man outside. Victor Hale stood on the porch, rain still dripping from his coat, his shirt half untucked, eyes bloodshot. The stench of whiskey rolled off him in waves. His frame was broad but sagging, strength eroded by drink and years of neglect. "Victor," Ethan said evenly, voice low, "you need to leave, now." Victor leaned forward, sneering. "Don't you start preaching at me, Ward. That boy is my nephew, my responsibility, and you've got no right keeping him here." Behind Ethan, the faint scrape of chair legs echoed as Noah pulled himself deeper under the table. His breathing quickened, shallow gasps of terror. Shadow barked sharply, a vicious snap that silenced the porch. Victor staggered back half a step, glaring at the dog. "Control that mutt before I put him down." Ethan's voice hardened. "You'll do no such thing. Shadow stays right where he is, and so does Noah." Victor's face twisted, red creeping up his neck. "You think you're better than me? Playing family with someone else's kid?" His words slurred, but his anger was sharp. "You don't know what it's been like. That boy. That boy ruined everything. My brother, my sister-in-law. They'd still be alive if not for him." The words cut through the cabin like a blade. Under the table, Noah's body crumpled further, as if shrinking away from existence. A muffled sob slipped from him, choked back into silence. Ethan's fists clenched. He wanted to drag Victor off the porch, pin him against the mud, and make him eat every word he'd just spit, but he held steady, his voice cold as steel. "You're done poisoning him. He's not yours to break anymore." Victor stepped closer, pressing against the chain that kept the door partially closed. His breath reeked of whiskey. "You don't get to decide that. The law's on my side. Papers, bloodline, all of it. And you?" He sneered. "You're just a lonely man with a dog and a badge that doesn't stretch this far." Shadow lunged forward, teeth snapping inches from Victor's hand. The man flinched back, fury flashing in his eyes. Ethan let the silence stretch, the dog's growl filling the space where words no longer mattered. "Go home, Victor," Ethan said finally, voice low but laced with warning. "Sober up, because the next time you come to my door like this, you'll be facing more than a locked chain." For a long moment, Victor just stood there, chest heaving, eyes wild. Then he spat into the mud and staggered back down the porch steps, muttering curses. His truck door slammed, engine roaring to life. Gravel sprayed as he tore away down the drive, leaving the cabin wrapped in a tense silence. Ethan shut the door, refastened the locks, and turned. Under the table, Noah was curled into himself, eyes squeezed shut, rocking slightly as if trying to vanish. Shadow immediately padded over, nose nudging the boy, whining softly. Ethan crouched beside the table, his voice gentler now. "He's gone, Noah. He can't hurt you here." But Noah didn't answer. His lips moved in a whisper only Shadow could hear. The dog pressed closer, crawling under the table to curl against him. Slowly, Noah's trembling eased, his small hands clinging to the shepherd's fur like lifelines. Ethan watched, jaw set, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Victor Hale had shown his hand. This wasn't just a drunk uncle trying to reclaim family. This was a man desperate to keep control of a boy who carried too many secrets. And Ethan knew, as he rose back to his feet, that this battle was only beginning. The rumble of Victor's truck had barely faded into the distance when silence reclaimed the cabin, heavy and suffocating. Noah remained huddled under the table, Shadow pressed tight against him, the boy's small hands gripping the shepherd's fur with desperate strength. Ethan crouched nearby, his heart still hammering, though his voice remained calm. "He's gone," Ethan repeated, steady but firm, as if the words themselves could seal the door shut. "He can't touch you here." Noah's wide eyes peered out from the shadows, rimmed red. He didn't speak, but his trembling slowed. Shadow licked his hand once, a quiet reassurance. Slowly, Noah crawled out from under the table, backpack clutched tightly against his chest. His face was pale, but his jaw was set in a way that startled Ethan. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the fragile shape of defiance. But Ethan knew better than to think Victor was finished. The man wasn't the kind to retreat quietly. He would be back, louder, more dangerous, and this time he'd come armed with words sharpened into weapons. It didn't take long. By late afternoon, another knock came, calmer, deliberate, but no less menacing. This time, Ethan was ready. He opened the door slowly, Shadow at his side, and found Victor standing there again. His clothes were cleaner now, his hair slicked back, but the stench of whiskey still lingered beneath the layer of cheap cologne. His eyes burned with a mix of arrogance and simmering rage. "I'm not here to argue," Victor said, holding up a hand. "I'm here to make this simple. That boy, my nephew, comes with me. Now." Behind Ethan, Noah stiffened at the sound of his uncle's voice. The boy retreated a step, nearly colliding with the table, his face paling as if the very air had turned poisonous. Shadow's growl rose instantly, low and guttural, filling the doorway. Ethan didn't move aside. His voice was level, though every word carried weight. "You show me the papers, court orders, guardianship signed and sealed. Until then, he stays here." Victor sneered. "You think you can play lawyer, Ward? I don't need to prove anything to you. I'm blood. That's more than enough." "Not in my house," Ethan shot back. "Not when the boy's safety is in question." Victor stepped closer, his shadow spilling across the threshold. "You've got no right to interfere. You think the county's going to back you up? They won't. They know me. They know the truth." His smile twisted, cruel. "That boy is mine to raise, whether you like it or not." Noah's voice cracked from behind Ethan, trembling but loud enough to be heard. "I don't want to go." The words cut the air like glass. Victor's eyes snapped past Ethan, locking onto the boy. His expression hardened into something cold, something dangerous. "You don't get a choice, boy," he snarled. "You never did." Shadow barked fiercely, lunging forward just enough to force Victor back half a step. Ethan held his ground, fury burning through his veins, but his tone remained measured. "You heard him, Victor. He doesn't want to go. And until a judge tells me otherwise, I'll defend his right to stay." Victor's face twisted, red creeping into his cheeks. His voice dropped to a low hiss. You think you can keep him? You think the law is on your side? I've got papers, insurance, witnesses who'll swear I'm the only one fit to care for him. You're nothing, Ward. A washed-up deputy clinging to someone else's mess. Ethan's jaw clenched. Then bring them. Bring your papers. Bring your witnesses. Until then, you've got no claim here but the one you shout over whiskey. The silence stretched. Victor's breathing grew ragged, his eyes narrowing into slits. For a moment, Ethan thought the man might lunge at him. But then Victor smiled, a slow, venomous curve of the lips that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Fine, Victor said. Play your little game. Keep him for now. But when the law comes down on your head, when they see you harboring a boy that doesn't belong to you, I'll be the one laughing. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper that oozed with malice. And when I get him back, Ward, I'll make sure he remembers who he belongs to. Noah whimpered, the sound breaking something inside Ethan. Shadow lunged again, teeth bared, a growl tearing through the cabin like thunder. Ethan's voice was ice when he answered. You'll never touch him again. Victor's eyes glittered, but he stepped back slowly, raising his hands as though conceding. We'll see, he muttered, turning on his heel. His boots thudded across the porch, down the steps, and onto the gravel. A moment later, the roar of his truck echoed down the drive, leaving behind the stench of cologne and the echo of his threat. Ethan closed the door, locked it, and turned back. Noah stood near the table, shaking, tears streaking down his face. Shadow pressed against him, tail stiff, as though daring the world to challenge him again. Ethan crouched, his voice steady but soft. You're not going anywhere, Noah. Not while I'm breathing. He can shout all he wants. He can wave papers, drag lawyers, whatever he thinks he has. But you're safe here. Noah's lips trembled. He'll come back. He always does. Ethan placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, grounding him. Then let him. We'll be ready. And for the first time, since the storm had brought Noah into his life, Ethan realized just how far he was willing to go. This wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about war. Victor had made his threat clear. Now it was Ethan's turn to answer. The cabin felt smaller after Victor left, as though his presence still clung to the walls like smoke. The faint scent of whiskey and cologne seemed lodged in the wood, souring the air. Outside, the sound of his truck faded into the distance, but inside the silence was heavy, oppressive. Noah stood frozen near the table, clutching his backpack so tightly that his knuckles blanched white. Shadow pressed against his leg, but the boy's eyes were fixed on the floorboards, unblinking, as though the world might split open beneath him. His shoulders trembled, his lips moved soundlessly before words finally broke free. It's my fault. Ethan, who had been locking the deadbolt and checking the window latches, froze. He turned, his brow furrowed. What is? Noah's voice cracked, trembling and raw. Everything. The accident. The fire. Mom and Dad. If I wasn't born, none of it would have happened. The words hung in the cabin like thunder. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. He crossed the room in 2 strides and crouched in front of the boy, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. Noah, look at me. But Noah shook his head violently, tears spilling down his cheeks. He told me every day, Uncle Victor, he said they fought because of me, that they hated each other because of me, that if I hadn't been born, they'd still be alive. His small frame collapsed inward, the backpack nearly slipping from his arms as sobs racked him. I ruined everything. Shadow whined softly, nosing under the boy's arm, but Noah clung tighter to the bag, burying his face against it as though trying to vanish. Ethan swallowed hard, fury burning in his veins, not at Noah, but at the poison Victor had planted in him. He wanted to march back into the storm, drag the man out of his truck, and silence him forever. But right now, Noah needed something else, truth spoken aloud, louder than Victor's lies. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "None of this," Ethan said firmly, his voice low but unshakable, "is your fault." Noah flinched, as if the words were too heavy to believe. But he said, "I don't care what he said," Ethan cut in, his tone sharpening. "Victor is a liar, and he's wrong. Your parents loved you. Do you hear me? Loved you. What happened to them wasn't because of you. It was because of choices made by adults, choices that had nothing to do with you being born." The boy's eyes lifted for the first time, wide and glistening, searching Ethan's face for cracks, for deception. His lips quivered. "But if I wasn't here..." Ethan leaned closer, locking eyes with him. "If you weren't here, Noah, the world would be smaller, emptier, and a hell of a lot darker. Don't ever believe that your life is a mistake. It's not. You are not a burden. You are a child who deserves to be safe and loved." Noah's chest hitched. His grip on the backpack loosened slightly. Shadow nudged harder against him, finally forcing the boy's arms open enough for the dog to climb into his lap. The shepherd curled there, heavy and warm, resting his head against Noah's chest. For a long moment, Noah just held on, burying his face in Shadow's fur. His sobs softened into shaky breaths, the storm inside him breaking, if only a little. Ethan stayed crouched in front of him, silent, letting the moment hold. Sometimes words weren't needed. Sometimes presence was the only medicine. Finally, Noah's voice emerged again, hoarse but softer. "Do you really think they loved me?" Ethan's throat tightened. He reached for the recorder still sitting on the table, pressed the button, and let Elena Morgan's voice fill the cabin again. The lullaby drifted through the room, soft and steady. Noah froze, his eyes closing as the melody wrapped around him. His lips moved silently, mouthing words he remembered by heart. When the song faded, Ethan spoke gently. "That's not just love, Noah. That's devotion. That's your mom making sure her voice would stay with you no matter what happened. You were never the reason for their pain. You were the reason they fought to hold on." Noah's tears came again, but softer this time, less jagged. He pressed his face into Shadow's neck, clutching the shepherd with both arms, as if anchoring himself to the truth. Ethan placed a hand lightly on the boy's back. "You survived, Noah. That's not your fault either. That's your strength. And I promise you this, I'll carry the fight now. You don't have to blame yourself anymore." The boy didn't answer, but he leaned into the touch, and for the first time since Ethan had found him under the porch, the rigid wall of fear cracked enough for comfort to seep through. The cabin felt different then. Not lighter, not yet, but steadier. Outside, the drizzle tapped softly against the windows, a gentler rhythm than the storm. Inside, a fragile peace began to take shape. Ethan knew the battle wasn't over. Victor's shadow still hung over them, and the truth of Michael and Elena's deaths remained buried in lies. But tonight, at least, Noah had taken his first step away from blame, away from the cruel chains Victor had wrapped around him. And Ethan vowed silently, with every ounce of resolve in him, he would make sure the boy never carried that weight again. The next morning broke pale and colorless, the kind of light that carried no warmth, only unfinished business. Noah still slept when Ethan left the cabin. Shadow stayed behind to guard the boy, loyal as ever. Ethan's boots crunched on gravel, his breath misting in the cool air. He'd promised Noah safety. But safety needed truth, and truth lived in places most avoided. Files, dust, records. The county courthouse stood at the edge of town, a red brick shell with crumbling mortar. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and paper. The archives lay in the basement, down a stairwell that groaned with age. Ethan had been here before, but today felt different. Today, the walls seemed to lean in. The archive was a cave of forgotten histories, rows of sagging shelves, folders yellowed with time. Dust swirled in the weak light from narrow windows. Behind an oak desk sat Mrs. Havers, the longtime clerk, her grey hair pulled into a bun, glasses on a chain. She looked up slowly. "You again," she rasped. "Been a while since you poked around down here." "Morning," Ethan said. "I need accident reports on Michael and Elena Morgan. Route 7 crash 7 years ago, then the fire at their house." Her eyes flickered. "Those files were closed long ago. Nothing more to see." "I'd like to see them anyway." For a long moment she studied him. At last she rose, fetched a box, and set it down with a thud. "Don't say I didn't warn you. Some things are better left buried." Inside were only thin folders, far fewer than Ethan expected. The first summary was blunt. Single vehicle accident. Michael Morgan deceased. Wet road, excessive speed. Case closed. Ethan frowned. He remembered the night of that crash. He had been there. First responder. The road was damp, yes, but not slick. He had seen long skid marks carved deep into the asphalt. They weren't in the report. Neither were the faint streaks of red paint on Michael's bumper, nor the photos he remembered being snapped. The file contained only 2 distant shots, taken at useless angles. The fire file was no better. Cause, electrical fault. Fatality confirmed. Ethan remembered whispers from neighbors about shouting the night before, and a fire chief who once muttered about accelerants before changing his story. Here, there was no mention of accelerants, no witness statements, just silence on paper. He leaned back, hollow anger tightening his jaw. These weren't errors. They were deliberate erasures. "You see it too, don't you?" Mrs. Havers said softly. She hadn't moved from her chair, her sharp eyes fixed on him. "You're not the first to ask," she continued. "But most stop after a page or two. Too dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Ethan asked. The Morgans stirred trouble. Insurance policies, debts, grudges. Victor Hale's name came up more than once, but every time it got close, someone buried it. She shut herself off after that. Ethan gathered copies, slipping them into a folder. As he left the courthouse, the hallways seemed colder, narrower. People passing by avoided his gaze, as if sensing the dust of secrets clinging to him. Outside, the sky hung low and gray. This wasn't just about Victor's cruelty anymore. It was conspiracy, layered in silence. But one name rose in Ethan's mind. Martha Delgado. Once a field investigator, she'd been sharp, stubborn, unwilling to bend. She'd retired after clashing too often with supervisors who preferred closure over truth. If anyone still had the missing pieces, it would be her. Ethan drove north, through empty fields, until he reached a weathered farmhouse. Its paint peeled, shutters sagged. The yard was littered with bird feeders and wind chimes. The curtains twitched before the door opened. Martha Delgado stood there, late 60s, silver braid, eyes still sharp. "Ward," she said flatly. "Didn't think I'd see you on my porch again. I need to talk about the Morgans." Her face hardened. For a moment, Ethan thought she'd shut him out, but she stepped aside. "You'd better come in." Inside smelled of coffee and dust. shelves brimmed with binders she had carried away when she left the job. She lit a cigarette, smoke curling around her. "You've stirred something you can't put back, haven't you?" "The files in the archive are gutted," Ethan said. "Skid marks erased. Photos missing." "Fire report a fairy tale. I need to know what you saw." She studied him, then returned with a battered envelope. She dropped it on the table. "Take a look." Inside were photos. Ethan's breath caught. One showed Michael's car crumpled against a tree, and the skid marks, long and dark, veering at a sharp angle. Another revealed a smear of red paint on the bumper, distinct against the silver body. "Another vehicle," Ethan murmured. Martha nodded grimly. "That's what I said. Impact at the rear quarter panel, forcing him off the road. But by the time my report reached the office, the photos were gone. My findings cut down to 2 lines. Wet road, speeding." She handed him another photo, a headlight fragment lying in grass. "Didn't match Michael's car. I logged it into evidence. It vanished." Ethan's gut twisted. "And the fire?" "Accelerants," she said flatly. "Gasoline, maybe kerosene. I smelled them myself. But the final report said, electrical fault. They never tested my samples. When I pressed, I was told to let it go, so I retired. But I kept what I could." The photos lay before him like shards of a smashed puzzle. Red paint, skid marks, a foreign headlight, accelerants ignored. It was no accident. The Morgans had been silenced, and Victor Hale had benefited. Insurance, guardianship, control of Noah. Martha studied him. "Why now, Ward?" "Because their boy is alive. He's with me. And Victor's trying to drag him back." Her eyes widened. "The boy survived?" Ethan nodded. "And he remembers enough to be dangerous." She exhaled, cigarette shaking. "Then you'd better be careful. If they silence the parents, they won't hesitate with him." Her words lingered heavy, but Ethan gathered the envelope. "They won't touch him, not while I'm here." Martha gave a dry laugh. "That's what I thought about the truth. Look how that ended." Ethan tipped his hat. "I've already lost enough." "I'm not losing him too." Outside, the wind chimes tinkled, fragile against the weight of what he carried. Inside his truck lay the ghosts of the Morgans, preserved by a woman who refused to forget. But ghosts weren't enough. He needed proof in the ground. The road to Route 7 felt heavier than ever. To most, it was just 2 lanes through forest. To Ethan, it was a crime scene. He parked on the shoulder. Shadow leapt down, nose twitching, body tense, as though he remembered too. They reached the curve. Ethan's memory sharpened. Skid marks, headlights in rain. Michael's car crushed against a tree. The surface had been repaved, but ghosts remained. "Find it, boy," Ethan whispered. Shadow sniffed along the shoulder, then stopped, barking sharp. He pawed at a maple trunk. Ethan crouched. Beneath dirt and weather, faint streaks of red paint clung to bark. He scraped with his knife, revealing bright enamel. Michael's car hadn't carried red. He snapped a photo, proof in his hand. Shadow barked again, nosing through leaves. Ethan sifted the soil, pulling free a shard of headlight. Dirty, weathered, but clear. Not Michael's design. Another vehicle, another impact. Triumph and fury surged in Ethan's chest. At last, evidence no one could dismiss. He bagged the fragment, marked the tree, his hands trembling with vindication. For years, the Morgans' deaths had been written off as bad luck. Now the road itself spoke the truth. He stood in the lane, imagining it. Michael driving through rain. Another car tailing close. The strike, tires screaming. A desperate fight for control. Then steel, glass, and silence. Someone had killed Michael. Someone had burned Eleanor. And Victor Hale had buried the last witness, Noah, under lies, but no longer. Shadow whined, nudging Ethan's hand. The boy was waiting at home. Ethan crouched, resting his forehead briefly against the shepherd's. "We'll finish this. For Michael. For Elena. For him." The wind stirred the trees, whispering like voices of the dead. Ethan gathered the evidence, snapped one last photo of the painted trunk, and walked back. Shadow trotted beside him, tail steady, a soldier after the first battle of a long war. As the truck pulled away, Ethan looked once in the mirror. The road vanished behind him, just another bend to passing drivers. But now it was alive again, marked, undeniable. A crime scene reborn. This time, he swore, it would not be buried. Raven Hollow was the kind of town where people noticed everything but said nothing. Outsiders called it quiet. Ethan knew better. It wasn't quiet. It was watchful. That morning, when he parked his truck on Main Street, the watchfulness was sharper. He felt it before stepping out. The stillness, the way conversations clipped short. Shadow dropped down from the passenger seat, padding at Ethan's side as he carried the folder of evidence. Heads turned in shop windows, then vanished. A man outside the hardware store flicked his cigarette and went in. Even the barber, who usually nodded, hid behind his newspaper. This wasn't hostility. It was colder. Silence sharpened into a blade. Inside the diner, the smell of bacon and coffee should have comforted him. Instead, the chatter was muted, only the clink of forks. Ethan sat at the counter, shadow curling at his feet. Marie, the waitress who'd known him since high school, poured coffee with a forced smile. "People are talking," she whispered, "saying you're stirring things best left alone." "And you?" Ethan asked. She didn't answer. She just walked away. He drank quickly, the bitterness grounding him. The air was heavy, with eyes he couldn't meet. Then a man he didn't know approached. Tall in a brown jacket, cap pulled low, boots muddy from the outskirts. His voice was low, meant only for Ethan. "You're digging where you shouldn't." "And you are?" Ethan asked evenly. The man smiled thinly. "Someone who knows when the ground's too rotten to dig. You think you're chasing the truth, but you'll only find a hole deep enough to bury yourself in." Shadow's growl vibrated through the floor. The man's gaze flicked down but didn't falter. "Smart dog. Smarter than his master, maybe." Ethan leaned in, voice tight. "Say it plain." "The Morgans weren't the first, won't be the last. This town doesn't forgive men who dig in the wrong places. Walk away, Ward. Leave the boy. Leave the past. Or you'll find yourself on the same road Michael Morgan did." He turned and left. The bell above the door jingled, mocking the weight of his words. The diner fell into heavier silence. No one looked at Ethan, but no one needed to. The message hung in the air. "Stop." Ethan crouched, hand on Shadow's neck. "Yeah." "I heard it too. Back on Main Street, nothing looked different. The same storefronts, the same cracked sidewalks, but every reflection was a watcher. Every passing glance, another warning. Ethan drove away, resolving sharpening with every mile. Silence was never neutral. Silence protected someone. That night, the cabin lay deep in stillness, the kind that made every sound sharper. Noah slept, curled against Shadow, his small hand buried in the shepherd's fur. Ethan sat awake by the fire, a book open but unread, his mind heavy with the day's threats. At 1 a.m., Shadow stirred, not the twitch of sleep, but the tense, deliberate stillness of alert. His growl was low, coiled. Ethan froze, hand brushing the pistol at his hip. Shadow padded to the front door, nose twitching. Ethan followed, ears straining. At first, only wind. Then, faint, deliberate, gravel crunching. A footstep. Ethan cracked the door. The porch was empty. Then he saw it, a cigarette on the railing, ember glowing red, smoke curling into the night, still warm. Someone had been standing there seconds ago, listening to the boy breathe inside. He stepped onto the porch, shadow pressed against his leg, teeth bared. The woods beyond gave nothing back, just whispers of wind, the faint chorus of crickets. But the cigarette's heat told him the truth. The watcher was still nearby. He crushed it under his boot, and a message returned. Coward, he thought. This was no break-in. This was a warning, left burning like a brand. Back inside, he checked every latch, every window. Noah stirred, eyes hazy, but sharp with fear. He was here, wasn't he? Ethan smoothed the blanket over him. You're safe. I won't let anyone touch you. But the boy's trembling betrayed his doubt. Shadow paced the door, hackles high. Ethan set the evidence folder on the desk, loaded his pistol, and took the armchair facing the door. He didn't sleep. The cigarette ember burned in his mind long into dawn. By morning, Ethan's resolve had hardened. The folder wasn't just proof anymore. It was a target. He couldn't carry the fight alone. There was one person he trusted, Linda Henley. Linda had taught at the elementary school for 20 years, the kind who noticed bruises hidden under sleeves and absences that didn't add up. She'd once spoken of Noah as a bright boy fading fast, before Victor pulled him from school altogether. If Elena had left anyone a trace of truth, it would be her. Ethan left Noah and Shadow at the cabin and drove to Linda's modest white house at the edge of town. Rose bushes lined the yard, now bare in the late season. She opened the door, chalk dust still on her hands, surprise flickering across her face. "Ethan Ward," she said softly. "It's been a while." "It has," he admitted. "I need to talk about Noah." Her eyes widened. "You've seen him?" "He's with me. Safe, for now. But Victor's circling. I think Elena left something with you." Fear, hesitation, then resolve passed across Linda's face. She stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled of tea and paper. Lesson plans were scattered across the table. She disappeared briefly, then returned with a small envelope, edges worn from years of keeping. She laid it down gently. "Eleanor gave me this the week before she died. Told me not to open it unless something happened." Ethan picked it up. The front read, "For Noah, or for the one who protects him." He unfolded it carefully. Elena's neat handwriting filled the page. "If anything happens, it won't be an accident. Victor has been circling us for months, whispering threats. He says the boy is mine to ruin, that no one will stop him. But I will not run. If you are reading this, it means the fight is over for me. Please protect Noah. Tell him he was never a burden. Tell him he was always our reason." Ethan read it twice, his chest tight. Elena had known. She had stood her ground anyway. He slid the letter back into its envelope. "This is it, the missing piece." Her words. Linda's eyes glistened. I wanted to believe she was wrong. But after the fire, I couldn't ignore it. I just didn't know who to trust. "You did the right thing," Ethan said. "Keeping this. It might be the only proof left." She looked at him, fear etched deep. "You're stirring something this town doesn't want uncovered." They'll come after you. After Noah. They already have, Ethan said. Last night, someone stood on my porch. Left a cigarette burning. Linda's hand flew to her mouth. God help you. I don't need God. I need allies. If I go down, Noah loses everything. You saw what Victor was doing even then. I need you now. Her hesitation broke. She nodded. I'll stand with you. For Noah. For Elena. Ethan tucked the envelope into his coat pocket, the weight of Elena's words pressing against his chest. As he left, Linda watched from the window, fear and resolve written in her face. Driving back through Raven Hollow, the silence still clung to storefronts. Eyes still followed. But now Ethan carried more than suspicion. He carried Elena's voice, her vow. I won't run. He whispered it aloud as the woods closed in. I won't run either. Night settled deep over the woods. Crickets sang steady outside, but inside the cabin, the only light came from a single lamp on Ethan's desk. Its glow spread across the wood, illuminating fragments of truth once buried in dust. Ethan sat, hunched forward, sleeves rolled, jaw tight. Shadow dozed nearby, ears twitching at every sound. On the couch, Noah slept fitfully, still clutching the recorder like a shield. Ethan studied the evidence piece by piece. First, the journal. Elena Morgan's handwriting filled its pages with warnings. If anything happens, it will not be an accident. The words burned like foresight, testimony refusing to vanish. Next, the insurance policy, warped by water but clear enough. Michael and Elena's names stood side by side, the payout substantial. And who would benefit from their deaths? Victor Hale. Ethan tapped the paper, the conclusion cold in his chest. Then the photographs Martha Delgado had hidden. Skid marks slashing across asphalt, a red paint streak against bark, a headlight fragment that didn't belong to Michael's car. Proof of another vehicle. Evidence erased deliberately. Finally, Elena's letter, the one Linda Henley had guarded for 7 years. Victor has been circling us. He says the boy is mine to ruin, but I will not run. The 4 pieces lay like compass points, each directing toward betrayal. Journal, insurance, photos, letter. Together they told one story. The Morgans hadn't died by accident. Ethan leaned back, exhaling. This was no longer suspicion. It was a case. Proof that could stand if brought into the light. But he knew what that meant. Evidence was not just a weapon. It was a beacon. The moment he revealed it, the silence of Raven Hollow would split open, and the people who buried the truth would come for him. His eyes drifted to Noah. The boy's face was slack with exhausted sleep, Shadow's head resting across his lap. He had carried fragments of this truth on his back, tucked in a ragged backpack, surviving long enough to deliver them. You carried it this far, Ethan whispered. I'll take it from here. He began ordering the pieces as if building a trial. Elena's journal for motive, the insurance policy for Victor's gain, Martha's photos and fragment for foul play, Elena's letter for her voice from the grave. Together, they were a tapestry of silence ripped open. He scribbled notes on a pad, names, arrows, underlines, until the story no longer felt like rumor but structure. Still, his skin prickled. He felt eyes again, the same unseen gaze that had left a cigarette burning on his porch. Shadow growled low, ears sharp. Ethan rose, checked the locks, then returned to the desk. He placed the items in a case under the desk, his hand lingering on the latch. These weren't just papers. They were voices. The Morgans speaking through him. Exhaustion pulled at him, but beneath it ran steel resolve. The truth was no longer whisper. It was a weapon. A shuffle broke the stillness. Ethan turned. Noah stood in the doorway, small frame silhouetted by lamplight, backpack clutched to his chest. Shadow padded close behind. "You're still awake," Noah murmured. "Old habit," Ethan said gently. "Couldn't sleep?" Noah shook his head and sat across from him, hands worrying the straps of his bag. Silence stretched until his voice broke through. "You need to know what he did." Ethan leaned forward. "Only if you're ready." The boy's voice trembled but pressed on. "He used to lock me in the basement, sometimes for days. He'd slide food under the door if he remembered. When he didn't, I drank water from the pipes." His eyes dropped. "I learned not to cry too loud. He didn't like the noise." Shadow pressed against Noah's knee. The boy stroked his head, steadying himself. "When he drank, it was worse," Noah whispered. "He'd open the door just to shout. Said I was the reason my parents were dead. Sometimes he hit me. Sometimes he just stood there, staring, like he wanted me gone." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he forced calm. "Did anyone else know?" "No. At school, I didn't tell. I thought maybe everyone's life was like that. When I got hurt, I said I fell. Nobody asked much. I wanted to tell Mrs. Henley once, but he pulled me out before I could." His lip trembled, but he didn't stop. "I thought maybe I deserved it. If I was better, he wouldn't hate me. But no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. Sometimes I wished I wasn't here anymore." Then he'd finally stop. The silence after was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the stove and Shadow's soft whine. Ethan reached across the table, palm steady. "Noah, listen to me. None of this was your fault. Not your parents, not him. You were just a boy surviving in a house that should have protected you. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger than most men I know." Noah's eyes brimmed, tears streaking down his cheeks. Hesitantly, he placed his small hand in Ethan's. "I didn't want to be a burden anymore," he whispered. "You're not a burden," Ethan said firmly. "You're the reason I'm standing. The reason your mom wrote those words. The reason Shadow hasn't left your side. You matter, more than you know." For the first time, belief flickered in the boy's eyes. Fragile, but real. Ethan slid the legal pad toward him. "What you just told me, it's important. Do you think you could help me write it down?" Noah hesitated, then nodded. He scrawled shaky lines. "He locked me in the basement. He said I killed them. He hit me." When he finished, he pushed the pad back, his chin lifting with quiet defiance. "Now it's not just in my head anymore." Ethan placed the page with the other evidence. "You did good, son. You gave the truth a voice. And no one will silence it again." Shadow barked softly, as if sealing the vow. The Morgans' house stood like a corpse on the edge of Raven Hollow. Fire had gutted it years ago, leaving blackened beams clawing at the sky. Grass grew tall around the ruins, as if the earth itself wanted to swallow them. Ethan parked at the edge of the property. Noah clutched the recorder. "I don't want to go near it," he whispered. "You don't have to," Ethan assured him. "Stay with the truck. Shadow and I will look." Shadow leapt out, nose twitching. Together they moved through the ruins. Windows gaped like empty sockets. Beams jutted like bones. Ethan murmured, "Search." The shepherd swept the ground, every step deliberate. Minutes passed. Then Shadow stiffened, pawing at a patch of uneven earth near the back. A sharp bark broke from his chest. Ethan knelt, scraping soil until metal scraped his hand. A rusted tin box emerged. "Good boy," he whispered, rubbing Shadow's neck. The box groaned open. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lay keepsakes. Elena's silver wedding band. A tarnished locket. Ethan opened it. Inside, a faded photo of Elena cradling baby Noah. Michael's arm around them both. Ethan's throat tightened. This was more than evidence. It was proof of a family, whole before it was shattered. Beneath the keepsakes lay a small bottle of pills. The label was faded, but legible. Elena Morgan. Ethan unscrewed the cap. Tablets rattled out, their type unmistakable. Heavy sedatives, sometimes lethal. Ink smudges marked the plastic. Fingerprints, clear enough to test. His pulse hammered. This was no longer suspicion. This was intent. Shadow barked once, ears sharp, scanning the tree line. The woods were still, but Ethan's hand went to his pistol. They weren't safe here. He gathered the objects, wrapping them carefully, tucking them inside his jacket. Back at the truck, Noah's eyes widened. "What did you find?" Ethan hesitated, then pulled the locket free and placed it in his hands. Noah opened it, breath catching. Tears welled as he saw the tiny photo. For the first time, a fragile smile broke his face. "That's us." "It's proof," Ethan said softly. "Proof they never left you. Proof of what happened." Noah clutched the locket to his chest, his small shoulders shaking. Shadow pressed against him, tail sweeping the seat. Ethan gripped the wheel, jaw set. The ring, the locket, the pills with fingerprints. Every piece pointed in one direction. For years, Raven Hollow had whispered that the Morgans' deaths were bad luck, misfortune, fate. But fate didn't leave fingerprints on bottles. Fate didn't bury keepsakes in a tin box behind a burned-out house. As the truck rumbled back onto the road, Ethan's resolve hardened. He had the truth now, enough to drag it into the light. And if Victor Hale wanted to stop him, he would have to do more than leave cigarettes burning on his porch. The courthouse loomed like a relic, its stone steps worn, its columns stained by decades of rain. On any other morning, it might have been just another building in Raven Hollow. Today, it felt heavier, its walls carrying judgment before the doors even opened. Ethan parked at the curb. Inside the truck, silence pressed thick. Noah sat in the back, his small hands gripping the locket Shadow had unearthed from the ruins. His knuckles were white, his shoulders rigid. "I don't want to go in," he whispered. Ethan turned, voice steady. "I know, but this isn't about facing him. It's about telling your truth. You've already done the hardest part. Now we make sure they hear it." Noah's eyes brimmed. "What if they don't believe me? What if they send me back?" Before Ethan could answer, Shadow pressed his head against the boy's shoulder. His golden eyes locked on Noah, as if to say, "I believe you. I will not leave you." Noah buried his face into the shepherd's fur. "He makes me brave." Ethan's throat tightened. He placed a hand on the boy's back. "Then he comes with us." He had fought for it, argued until the clerk relented. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was Noah's anchor. Special permission had been granted. Together they climbed the courthouse steps. Whispers rippled among townsfolk lingering outside. Ward stirring trouble again. Best left buried. Noah flinched, shoulders curling, but Shadow's growl rumbled softly. The boy straightened, clutching the leash. Inside, the air smelled of polish and dust. At the clerk's desk, Ethan slid the permission slip forward. "He's allowed." The stamp fell with a heavy thud. Down the hall, the oak doors of the courtroom loomed. Ethan crouched to Noah's level. This is the moment. No matter what Victor says, you hold to your truth. You're not alone. The boy swallowed, nodded faintly. I'll try. That's all I ask. The bailiff swung the doors wide. The chamber buzzed. Murmurs, papers, shifting chairs. At the far end, Judge Halverson, stern and silver-haired, surveyed the room, and in the front row sat Victor Hale. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale from drink, but his eyes burned with smug certainty, until they fell on Shadow. The shepherd's growl reverberated across the chamber, and Victor's smirk faltered. The gavel cracked once. This hearing is in session. The matter: guardianship of Noah Morgan. Victor's lawyer rose first. Carlton Briggs, polished and smooth, addressed the court like a practiced actor. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of family. My client, Mr. Hale, is the boy's sole surviving relative. Blood ties are sacred. In the absence of his parents, guardianship rightly returns to him. Mr. Hale provided a home, food, shelter. Mr. Ward, however well-meaning, has no legal connection. Belief is not law. Blood is. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Victor leaned back, arms folded, smirk returning. Ethan rose slowly, folder in hand. He walked to the center, his voice cold. Blood doesn't make a guardian. Safety does. And Noah has never been safe with Victor Hale. He opened the folder, laying documents on the table. This is Elena Morgan's journal. In it, she records threats from Victor Hale. Her words: if anything happens, it will not be an accident. Gasps stirred. Ethan held up the next document, an insurance policy, signed by Michael and Eleanor. In the event of their deaths, the payout goes to Victor Hale. Motive, written in ink. Briggs shifted, his confidence thinning. Ethan spread photographs across the bench. Crime scene photos preserved by investigator Martha Delgado. Skid marks too long for a simple accident. Red paint on Michael's bumper, paint from another vehicle. A headlight fragment not belonging to his car. Evidence of a ramming. Yet these details vanished from the official report. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Victor shifted uneasily. Ethan clicked a recorder. Static filled the air. Then Victor's slurred voice poured out. He's mine to ruin. If you don't give me what I want, I'll take it anyway, and no one will stop me. Silence fell like a blow. All eyes turned to Victor. His jaw tightened, hands gripping his chair. Ethan shut it off. That is the man claiming guardianship. That is the voice Noah heard through locked doors. The voice that called him a burden. The voice that starved him. Briggs jumped up. Your Honor, the recording's authenticity. Sit down, Judge Halverson snapped. Ethan faced the bench once more. This case isn't about bloodlines. It's about survival. Noah has survived years of cruelty at Victor Hale's hands, and now he has the courage to speak. Let him. The judge nodded. Very well. Let the boy speak. But before Noah could rise, Shadow did. The shepherd stiffened, ears pricked, gaze locked on Victor. A growl built into a bark that shook the walls. The courtroom jolted. Jurors flinched. Spectators gasped. Victor recoiled, fear flashing through his bravado. Noah placed a hand on Shadow's neck, steadying him. His voice was small but clear. It's him. That's the voice. The silence was crushing. Judge Halverson's gaze cut to Victor. This court is not blind to the reactions of children or animals. Victor sputtered. It's a dog. Dogs growl at anyone. But the gallery leaned forward, whispers sparking. I remember Elena said he threatened her. I saw him drag the boy once. And then the silence cracked. Martha Delgado rose from the benches. Your Honor, I filed reports years ago. Reports that were altered. I preserved photographs proving the crash was no accident. I have them here. She held up a folder. Then Linda Henley stood, her voice trembling but clear. I was Noah's teacher. I saw the bruises, the hunger. Weeks before her death, Eleanor gave me a letter. She wrote that if anything happened, Victor was to blame. I kept it safe. I have it here. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The judge gestured for both women to submit their evidence. Victor's lawyer sputtered. This is irregular. Enough, the judge barked. Victor surged to his feet, shouting, They're lying. You think I'd risk everything for some brat? His words broke when Noah stood. The boy's knees shook, but his chin lifted. His hand never left Shadow's back. His voice cracked but carried. He locked me in the basement. He hit me. He said I killed my parents. He said I was his to ruin. I don't want to go back. Tears streaked his cheeks, but his words held. The courtroom froze. Judge Halverson removed his glasses, setting them down. His voice was heavy with finality. This court has heard enough. Mr. Hale, your petition for guardianship is denied. Effective immediately, all custodial rights are stripped. You are subject to criminal investigation into the deaths of Michael and Elena Morgan, and into the abuse of their son. The gavel struck once. Custody of Noah Morgan is granted to Ethan Ward, pending permanent review. The chamber erupted. Deputies moved swiftly as Victor lunged, cursing. His shouts echoed as they restrained him and dragged him out. Noah pressed into Shadow, tears spilling, but for the first time, they weren't just fear. They were released. Shadow licked his hand, tail thumping once. Ethan placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, his own throat tight. It's over. He can't hurt you anymore. Noah turned, face streaked with tears, and whispered the words Ethan would never forget. We're free? Ethan nodded, his voice breaking. We're free. In that moment, amid chaos, whispers, and the collapse of silence, justice, long buried, finally rose. The courthouse battle was over, but Ethan knew it wasn't finished. Custody was secure, yet Victor's shadow lingered. Freedom wasn't enough. The truth had to be proved beyond whispers. That proof lay under the harsh lights of the county evidence lab. Detective Vickers bent over a microscope, his lined face drawn into focus. On the stainless steel table lay the pieces Ethan had carried from ruin. A shard of red paint scraped from a tree, the headlight fragment from the ditch, the prescription bottle Shadow had dug up. Beside them, photographs of Victor Hale's truck, impounded after his courtroom outburst, showed scratches along the bumper, streaks of silver gouged into red enamel. Tell me what you see, Ethan said quietly. Vickers shifted the slide, then leaned back. I see a match. Ethan's chest tightened. You're sure? As sure as science gets. The paint on that tree, same pigment formula as Hale's truck. The scratches line up with the angle of impact on Michael Morgan's car. That crash wasn't an accident, Ward. It was a push. The words struck like iron. And the headlight? Ethan pressed. Vickers held it up, ridges catching the light. Manufacturing stamp matches Hale's truck. That fragment came off the night he forced Michael off the road. Ethan exhaled slowly, the puzzle locking into place. Then Vickers lifted the prescription bottle. Elena Morgan's name faded on the label, but the smudged prints were fresh in the system. Came back to Victor. Multiple hits. And these pills? He tipped them into a dish. Not what the label says. Heavy sedatives. Enough to knock someone out. Or worse. Ethan's jaw clenched. He fed them to her. Control. Maybe to keep her quiet. Maybe to kill her, Vickers said grimly. That box your dog found. It was her last defense. She knew what he was doing. She knew she might not survive. Ethan rubbed his face, Eleanor's words echoing. If anything happens, it will not be an accident. She had been right all along. Vickers packed the bags. We'll reopen the case. Vehicular homicide for Michael. Arson, maybe murder for Eleanor. Child abuse for Noah. Fraud with the insurance. It ties together clean. Hale's arrogance bought him years, but arrogance doesn't erase fingerprints. For the first time, Ethan felt the silence of Raven Hollow crack. Not a full break, but light bleeding through. What about Noah? He asked. He stays with you, Vickers said. You've given him what no one else did, a chance. Now the law will keep him safe. Shadow waited by the door, watching with quiet vigilance. Ethan crouched, rubbing his fur. You found what no one else could. You gave her back her voice. The detective's warning followed him out. He won't go quietly. Cornered men are dangerous. Ethan's reply was steady. Let him try. He's already lost the boy. He's already lost the truth. The warrant was signed at dawn. Vickers delivered it bluntly across Ethan's table. Vehicular homicide, arson, abuse, fraud. We're bringing him in today. Noah slept on the couch. Shadow curled close. Ethan lowered his voice. How? Quiet. No sirens. We'll walk him out and let the town see what he is, small and finished. That afternoon, the unmarked car pulled into Victor's drive. His house sagged at the town's edge, porch littered with bottles. He stepped out, eyes bloodshot, smirk faintly curling. What's this? He sneered. Come to waste my time? Vickers didn't bother with speeches. He held the warrant steady. Victor Hale, you're under arrest for the murders of Michael and Eleanor Morgan and the abuse of their son. The words landed like a hammer. Victor blinked, mouth opening but no sound coming. For years he had twisted words into chains. Now words were chains themselves. Deputies stepped forward. Victor faltered, the fight gone before it began. You've got nothing, he muttered, voice hollow. The cuffs clicked, cold metal stripping away his last illusion of power. Neighbors gathered, curtains twitching, doors opening. People who had turned away for years now watched in silence. For once, no one looked aside. A woman whispered, I knew Elena was afraid of him. A man muttered, We let him walk too long. Victor's eyes darted wildly, searching for old shields. There were none. Don't look at me like that, he shouted, voice cracking. You all knew. You all let me. His words collapsed into a plea. You can't do this. But they could. The deputies guided him into the car. He sagged in the back seat, small and pale, arrogance gone. On the sidewalk, Ethan stood with Noah and Shadow. The boy's hand tightened around the locket as the car pulled away. It's real, he whispered. He's really gone? Ethan crouched, his voice low but firm. He's gone, son. This time he's not coming back. Shadow barked once, sharp and clear. Around them, Raven Hollow stood in silence. Not the silence of complicity, but the silence of reckoning. The cabin felt different when they returned. Quiet, but not threatening. The afternoon sun broke through the pines, laying golden shards across the floor. Noah stood in the center of the room, still clutching the locket. His voice trembled. "Did they catch him?" Ethan crouched, meeting his gaze. "They caught him. He's not coming back. Not tonight. Not ever." The words took a moment to sink in. Then Noah moved forward, collapsing against Ethan's chest. Ethan held him tight, steady, whispering against his hair. "It's over. You're safe now." Shadow pressed close. Noah dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the shepherd's neck. Sobs spilled out, not of fear this time, but of release. Shadow stayed still, bearing it silently, his warmth steady as stone. Ethan watched, his chest aching in a way that felt almost healing. In the fragile bond of boy and dog, he saw something he thought Raven Hollow had lost: hope. When Noah finally pulled back, his face streaked with tears, there was something new in his eyes. Not just fear, a spark. "He can't hurt me anymore." "No," Ethan said firmly. "He can't." Noah leaned into Shadow again, whispering a single word. "Safe." The shepherd gave a low, contented rumble, as though sealing the vow. That evening passed quietly. Ethan made stew. Noah ate cautiously, then steadily, Shadow's head resting on his lap. Later, the boy doodled stick figures and a lopsided dog. He giggled once, a sound fragile as glass, but clear. Ethan looked away, swallowing the rush in his throat. He whispered it to himself, almost in disbelief. Safe. By nightfall, Noah lay beneath blankets on the couch, Shadow curled at his side. For the first time, his sleep was unbroken, his breaths calm, his hand resting on the dog's back. Ethan sat in the armchair, listening to that rhythm. There would still be trials, investigations, a long road ahead. But tonight, the boy had said the word aloud, and believed it. Safe. And for the first time, Ethan believed it too. The morning sky was pale, stretched in muted grays, as if the heavens themselves held their breath. Ethan drove slowly along the winding road to the cemetery, his hands steady, though his chest felt heavier with every mile. Noah sat in the back seat, silent, clutching the chipped red fire truck he had carried since Ethan first found him. Shadow pressed close, head resting on the boy's knee, golden eyes watching his face as though guarding his heart. At the hilltop gate, Ethan parked. Noah hesitated, his grip on the toy tightening until his knuckles whitened. "Do I have to go all the way up?" he whispered. "Only if you're ready," Ethan said gently. "But I think your mom and dad would want to see you. And I think you want to see them too." The boy's lip trembled, but he nodded. Shadow leapt down beside him, tail brushing his leg like encouragement. The path wound through rows of stones, slick with morning dew. Near the crest, two names waited: Michael Morgan, Elena Morgan. Cold granite, but alive in Noah's memory. He froze a few feet away, breath catching. Ethan rested a steady hand on his shoulder. "Take your time." Step by step, Noah moved forward until he stood before the graves. His small frame looked fragile against the stones, but his presence gave them life again. He knelt, placing the fire truck gently at the base. His hands lingered, trembling. "This was ours," he whispered. "You always said I'd be brave, like a firefighter. I kept it, so I wouldn't forget. Tears streamed down his cheeks. I didn't forget. Not ever. Ethan stood back, throat tight. He had seen soldiers bury comrades, children cry for lost parents, but this moment cut deeper. Not just grief, but a boy giving the last piece of his childhood to those he'd loved most. Noah's shoulders shook. I miss you. I thought maybe you left because of me, but Ethan said it wasn't my fault, and I believe him now. I want you to know that. I believe him. Shadow whined softly and lay at Noah's side. The boy bent into the shepherd's fur, sobs muffled but steady. Ethan crouched beside him, placing a hand on his back. They'd be proud of you, he said quietly. Proud of your love, and proud that you never let anyone take it away. Noah lifted his face, eyes red but searching. Do you really think so? I know so, Ethan said. His voice broke, but the truth stood. For a long while, boy, man, and dog stayed in silence. The wind whispered through the trees, leaves rustling like voices too far to hear, but near enough to feel. Noah traced the stone with his fingertips, then leaned closer, whispering words Ethan couldn't catch. Secrets only a son could tell. When he rose, he wiped his eyes with his sleeve. His shoulders were straighter now. I left it for them, he said, glancing at the toy. So they know I didn't forget. They'll know, Ethan said firmly. And they'll know you're safe now. Noah nodded, his hand gripping Shadow's collar. Together, they walked back down the path. The fire truck gleamed faintly in the morning light, a small red sentinel carrying Noah's love where he could no longer stay. The drive back was hushed. The boy leaned into Shadow, hand buried in fur, eyes rimmed with tears, but shoulders lighter. Grief hollowed him, but release had begun to seep in. At the cabin, Ethan set a pot of water on the stove. Small rituals filled the silence. Kettle whistle, mugs clinking, Shadow's nails tapping the wood. Noah sat curled on the couch, distant, knees tucked up. Ethan placed a mug of cocoa before him. Drink, it'll help. The boy nodded, wrapping his hands around the warmth. He sipped, lips trembling, then glanced up, studying Ethan with fragile intensity. Ethan? Yeah, son. His fingers fidgeted. His voice was barely above a whisper. Can I ask you something? Of course. The boy's chest rose quick, words stuck in his throat. Finally, with draining courage. Can I call you Dad? The air froze. Ethan's mug slipped from his hand, thudding softly onto the rug. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Noah's eyes dropped, shame flooding his face. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. You're not... Ethan was already there, crossing the room in 2 strides. He knelt, steadying the boy's trembling shoulders. His voice cracked, raw. No, Noah, don't you ever apologize for that. You have no idea what it means to hear you ask. Tears brimmed in Noah's eyes. But you're not really... I know I'm not Michael, Ethan said, breaking on the name. I'll never replace him. But if you need someone in that place, if you need someone to be that for you, then yes. Yes, you can call me Dad. Noah's lip trembled, then his arm shot forward, wrapping Ethan's neck. Dad, he whispered into his shoulder, testing the word, tasting it, letting it take root. Dad. Ethan's arms closed around him, fierce, protective. Tears spilled into the boy's hair. "I've got you," he murmured. "For as long as I live, I've got you." Shadow pressed against them both, solemn and tall, a guardian who had carried them through the storm and now bore witness to this moment. When Noah pulled back, cheeks wet but smiling faintly, he whispered, "I never thought I'd get to say that word again." "Then say it as much as you want," Ethan said softly. "You've earned it." The fire crackled gently. Outside, the woods shifted with wind. Inside, the cabin felt different, lighter, warmer. For the first time, it was truly home. The next morning broke soft and golden, sunlight scattering through the trees until the yard looked dusted in silver. Ethan stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching Noah wander slowly through the grass. The boy's steps were cautious, but his shoulders no longer hunched. Shadow brushed against his leg, tethering him. Noah crouched at the flower bed, tracing the petals of wildflowers that had bloomed again despite storms. Then it happened. So small, so sudden, Ethan almost thought it a trick. A butterfly, orange and black, fluttered down and landed delicately on a bloom. Noah froze, eyes wide. Shadow lifted his head, tail wagging. Then a bark burst out, sharp, joyful, not warning, but delight. Noah flinched, bracing for punishment that never came. Instead, Shadow barked again, prancing lightly. The butterfly stayed, wings fluttering unconcerned. Something cracked open in the boy. His lips twitched, hesitated, then curved. A sound broke free, shaky at first, then clear, rolling like music, a laugh. Ethan nearly dropped his coffee. He had heard Noah cry, whisper, plead. He had never heard him laugh. The boy clutched Shadow's fur, laughing again, louder now, his face alight. Shadow barked and spun, feeding on his joy. Ethan's throat tightened. He set his cup down, gripping the railing. It wasn't just a laugh. It was proof. Proof Noah's spirit, though battered, had not been broken. The boy turned, cheeks flushed. "Did you see? It just landed. Like it wanted me to see it." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat and smiled. "I saw. I heard too." Noah tilted his head. "Heard what?" "Your laugh," Ethan said softly. "First time I've heard it." The boy ducked his head, embarrassed, but his smile stayed. They lingered there together, man, boy, and dog, watching the butterfly rise and disappear into the woods. The silence that followed was no longer heavy, and it was light, filled with possibility. That night Noah slept beneath blankets, Shadow curled at his side. His breath was steady, unbroken, hand resting on the shepherd's back. Ethan sat nearby, listening. For the first time, he heard not fear, but peace in the boy's sleep. He whispered it like a vow, like a prayer. Let him keep that laugh. Let it grow. The cabin hadn't changed in its bones. Same cedar beams, same creaking floors. But the air inside was different now. It no longer felt hollow. It breathed. Ethan noticed it first in the little things. Crayon drawings taped to the fridge, their lines uneven but full of life. A man with broad arms, a boy, and a dog with ears too large for its body, all smiling beneath a sun brighter than Raven Hollow's sky had been in months. On the couch, a blanket frayed from use lay tossed aside. Books that once gathered dust sat open on the table, their pictures traced by curious fingers. Noah sat cross-legged on the rug, coloring another page. Shadow sprawled at his side like a living anchor. The boy looked up shyly when Ethan paused at the fridge. "That's us," he whispered, pointing to the drawing. "You, me, and him." Ethan smiled, his voice low. "Looks about right." For the first time, Noah didn't duck in fear of being wrong. He just smiled back, small but real. That night, as the fire burned low, Ethan watched him stroke Shadow's fur in a quiet rhythm. "You know something?" he said softly. "He picked you, not me." Noah blinked. "Shadow?" "That stormy night. I didn't see you first. He did. He wouldn't leave until I listened. Dogs don't make mistakes about people. He chose you." The boy's fingers stilled. "Why would he choose me?" Ethan's voice was steady. "Because he knew you needed someone. And maybe he knew I did too." Noah lowered his head, whispering, "I don't know if I'm worth choosing." Ethan leaned forward, firm but gentle. "Listen to me. You've carried truth in a backpack when no one else would. You stood in court and spoke when fear nearly broke you. You are worth every choice, worth more than you know." Shadow lifted his head then, nudging Noah's chin with his nose. The boy let out a small laugh. Rare, fragile, but real. Later, when Ethan told him it was bedtime, Noah hesitated at the couch. His voice was small, testing. "Can I call you Dad?" The word hit like a blow. Ethan froze, the mug slipping from his hand. Before shame could make the boy retreat, Ethan crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt, gripping his shoulders. His voice broke, raw. "Don't ever apologize for that. I'll never replace your father, Noah. But if you need me to be that, then yes. Yes, you can call me Dad." The boy's arms shot around his neck, desperate and fierce. "Dad," he whispered again, and the word rooted itself like a seed that had waited too long for light. At their feet, Shadow pressed close, silent witness to a vow sealed not by blood, but by choice. The days that followed carried a quiet new rhythm, meals eaten without fear of them being taken away. Laughter, hesitant at first, then freer, as Shadow begged for scraps or sprawled across Noah's drawings. The cabin smelled of cocoa and bread instead of loneliness. But it was the morning in the yard that changed everything. Noah crouched by the wildflowers, Shadow brushing against his leg, when a butterfly fluttered down and perched delicately on a bloom. Shadow barked once, sharp, joyful, not warning, but wonder. Noah flinched at the sound, instinct bracing for punishment that never came. Instead, the butterfly stayed, wings trembling but unafraid. Shadow barked again, tail wagging. Something cracked open in the boy. His lips twitched, then curved. A laugh escaped, shaky, uncertain, then rolling into something light and unguarded. Ethan nearly dropped his coffee on the porch. He had heard Noah cry, whisper, plead, but never laugh. The boy looked back, eyes wide. "Did you see? It landed like it wanted me to see it." Ethan swallowed hard, smiling through the tightness in his throat. "I saw. And I heard too." "Heard what?" Noah asked. "Your laugh," Ethan said. "First time I've heard it." Color bloomed in the boy's cheeks. He ducked his head, but the smile stayed. Shadow barked again, as if to seal the moment. Ethan whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. Let him keep that laugh. Let it grow. Weeks later, the 3 of them walked down Main Street together for the first time. The town that once whispered in silence now stirred cautiously back to life. Curtains parted, doors opened. Some faces carried guilt, some relief, but no one turned away this time. Mrs. Larkin from the bakery lifted a hand in greeting. Noah waved back shyly. Shadow moved steady at his side, ears pricked, but no longer in constant tension. Ethan crouched briefly, letting Noah switch from gripping Shadow's fur to holding his hand. "Do you know something?" he said gently. "You've been braver than most men I've ever known. You taught me what trust looks like." The boy's eyes softened. "I had to," he whispered. "You and Shadow, you saved me." "Not saved," Ethan corrected. "Guided. Sometimes miracles don't come with wings. Sometimes they come with paws, or with a hand that refuses to let go." Noah grinned faintly. "Sometimes they come with both." They passed the park, where he had once hidden, now lit in sunlight. Children's laughter rang faintly from the distance. Ordinary, extraordinary. Shadow paused by the oak tree, then sat, tail sweeping the ground. Noah knelt, pressing his forehead against the shepherd's. "Thank you for choosing me," he whispered. Ethan's throat tightened, but for once the ache was sweet. By the time they reached the edge of town, the fields stretched wide beneath a sky washed in gold. Noah looked up, eyes shining. "Do you think we'll always be okay?" Ethan crouched so they were eye to eye. "I do, because we chose each other, and when you choose someone, you carry them through everything. We'll be okay. Together." Shadow barked once, clear and steady, echoing across the quiet road. Noah laughed again, light and unburdened, and in that sound, the last remnants of the storm finally broke apart. The three of them stood there, man, boy, and dog, unshakable, whole. And as they walked forward into the morning, Noah's laughter carried across Raven Hollow like sunlight breaking through the dark. The town, the sun, the endless sky, everything seemed to pulse with quiet affirmation. Sometimes miracles didn't come with wings. Indeed, sometimes they came as a steady hand holding yours in the dark, a loyal paw brushing against your leg in reassurance, and a child's courage that refused to surrender to fear. And as Ethan, Noah, and Shadow continued down the sunlit path toward life renewed, Maple Hollow seemed to exhale, welcoming them home. Not just to the town, but to the promise of hope, trust, and a future earned through bravery, loyalty, and the quiet power of love. I'd love to share a few thoughts with you from the heart. Stories like Ethan, Noah, and Shadow remind us of the quiet, steadfast loyalty that German shepherds and dogs of all kinds bring into our lives. They teach us patience, courage, and the simple joy of presence. Sometimes it's in their soft nudge, their watchful gaze, or the way they sense our fears before we even speak, that we feel the deepest connection. These bonds aren't measured in words or grand gestures. They're felt in every shared glance, every comforting paw, every small act of trust. If you've ever wanted to deepen that connection with your own dog, there are gentle ways to do it, little steps that honor their instincts and yours. I've come across resources that feel more like guidance from a friend than instruction, and they've helped me notice things I might have overlooked in my own companion. You might enjoy exploring something like that for yourself. It's quiet, thoughtful, and entirely optional. And if you do, I think you'll find, just like Ethan and Noah, that the love and loyalty of a dog can change your world in ways you never expected.